Whether you love him or not, there's no denying that Brandon Sanderson has changed fantasy forever. He's not just a best-selling author, he's one of the most successful fantasy writers of all time. With a massive interconnected universe, intricate world building, and an almost unheard of writing speed, Sanderson has built an empire that few authors can match. But his influence goes far beyond selling books. So today, let's break down exactly how Brandon Sanderson has changed the game and what it means for the future of fantasy. Part 1. Sanderson's impact on fantasy magic systems. So before Brandon Sanderson, fantasy magic was often mysterious, undefined, and unpredictable. For example, in The Lord of the Rings, magic just exists. It's ancient, mystical, and rarely explained. Or we could take another classic, Earthsea, where magic is more about philosophy than strict mechanics. Or even The Wheel of Time, magic is powerful, but still somewhat mysterious with its own loose rules. And this approach, often called soft magic, worked really well because it created that sense of wonder and mystery. Magic felt vast, unknowable, and beyond human comprehension, but it also had a drawback. When magic is vague, it can also feel like a plot device rather than a real part of the world. And that's where Brandon Sanderson kinda changed everything. Rather than treating magic as something mystical and undefined, Sanderson introduced magic that follows clear rules, limitations, and logical consequences, and he really popularized what is known today as a hard magic system. I'm sure he probably didn't create it, but he definitely made it mainstream and very popular. And he didn't just do it in his books. He actually broke down his philosophy of magic into 3 different laws that have kind of reshaped modern fantasy. 1. An author's ability to solve problems with magic is directly proportional to how well the reader understands it. So this means that if magic is going to be used to solve a major conflict, the reader needs to understand how it works. So we see this, for example, in Mistborn when Vin burns pewter to enhance her strength. We know exactly how it helps her fight. Rule number 2, limitations are more interesting than powers. So this just means that it's not about what magic can do, but what it can't do. So we see this in Stormlight Archive, for example, where characters need Stormlight to fuel their abilities, creating inbuilt tension around when and how they can use magic. And then rule number 3, expand on what you have before adding something new. So this just means that instead of introducing new types of magic in every book, Sanderson believes that exploring existing systems more deeply makes for richer storytelling. So for example, the Cosmere, as you probably know, has multiple magic systems, but they often interconnect in surprising ways, making each book feel like a part of a larger puzzle. And Sanderson hasn't just talked about structured magic systems, he's built them into his books. So obviously we have Mistborn's Allomancy, which has like a cause and effect magic system, where magic users consume different metals to produce specific predictable effects. And it has balanced limitations, the fact that not everyone has access to all the abilities, and magic comes with physical tolls. And then for example in Stormlight Archive we have Surge Binding, which has layered complexity where magic is tied to oaths and bonds with mystical spread, making it more than just a power system. And another unique thing about Sanderson's magic system is this almost scientific approach. Magic follows real-world physics principles like manipulating gravity, and each of these magic systems aren't just cool, they fundamentally shape the world and characters. And that's what makes Sanderson's approach so influential. Brandon Sanderson didn't just popularize his hard magic systems, he made them almost the gold standard in modern fantasy. I would almost say that before Sanderson, magic was very often mystical, undefined, and shrouded in mystery. But now in 2025, we're seeing a lot of authors take a very structured, rule-based approach to magic, an approach where limitations matter just as much as the powers themselves. And because of that, hard magic systems have become the norm in a lot of ways. Another thing that's becoming a norm is the need to have an amazing website, but you might be wondering, how do I even go about creating one? If that's you, then having an all-in-one website is crucial, which brings me to today's sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is the all-in-one website platform for entrepreneurs and those looking to build their brand and business online. So whether you've been into the entrepreneur game for a long time, you're just starting, or maybe you're just trying to manage a growing brand, Squarespace makes it so incredibly easy to create exquisite websites while simultaneously allowing you to engage with all your audience and to sell whatever kind of products or services you may have. It's literally all in one place and it's on your terms. If you're a little unsure about using Squarespace, do not worry. Squarespace provides every single tool you'll need to create your dream website. They have literally hundreds of layout options and every single one is customizable. With the new design intelligence, which by the way combines 2 decades of industry-leading design expertise with cutting-edge technology, Squarespace will literally empower you to build a beautiful, personalized, and excellently tailored website that fits your unique needs and original identity. You can head over to squarespace.com to start your free trial today, and when you're ready to launch your website, head on over to squarespace.com/libraryofaviking to save 10% off your first website. Let's get back to the video. Now, I'm not going to be able to say here that Sanderson is the sole reason why we now see so much more defined way of looking at magic systems, but I just want to highlight some examples where we have seen this being embraced in the fantasy niche. So let's just have a look at some of fantasy major works that have embraced Sanderson's structured approach to magic. So I would argue that in the Poppy War by R.F. Kuang, we kind of see this, right? Instead of magic being free and limitless in that world, it does come with a psychological cost, where users risk losing their sanity to access divine powers. This follows Sanderson's second law: limitations make magic more interesting than powers. Or we could look at Will White's Cradle, a progression-based magic system where characters level up their powers like an RPG. And here, instead of random power-ups, each ability comes with rules and constraints that dictate how the system works. Or even Netflix Arcane. Unlike traditional fantasy, Arcane treats magic as a scientific force, creating rules, experimentation, and consequences. And this again follows Sanderson's philosophy that magic is most satisfying when readers understand its mechanics and its risks. So the shift is clear. For many, magic is no longer just a mystical tool for storytelling. It's something that must be explained, structured, and balanced. Also, another major change is that magic is no longer just a convenience for plot resolution. It's part of how fantasy worlds function. So magic now often influences economies, politics, warfare, and even technology in modern fantasy world building. And authors will often spend more time developing their magic systems, ensuring they integrate naturally into their culture, society, and history than ever before. So instead of magic just happening when the plot needs it, authors now think about how magic would realistically shape the world. So this kind of structured approach is definitely one of Sanderson's biggest legacy in fantasy writing. But obviously, with all of these detailed rule-based magic systems, there's always an ongoing debate. For example, has fantasy become too scientific now? And also, are we losing the mystery that made magic feel magical? I know some critics, and myself included, have occasionally talked about how explaining every rule and limitation can remove that sense of awe and wonder that made older fantasy feel so immersive. So for example, in Lord of the Rings, Gandalf's magic is never explained, but it feels so powerful. But now almost every new fantasy books explain how the magic works in a lot of details, which kind of leads to this question: has modern fantasy turned magic into science rather than something mystical and awe-inspiring? So there's no doubt, obviously, that Sanderson's influence has reshaped the way the magic is written in modern fantasy. But that's not the only area he has revolutionized. So let's go to part 2, the Kickstarter revolution. In 2022, Brandon Sanderson shocked the publishing world when he launched a Kickstarter for 4 secret books, and within a matter of days, it became the biggest Kickstarter in history. It raised $41.7 million, it had more than 185,000 backers, and it was funded within minutes. So just to put that into perspective, Sanderson's campaign out-earned entire publishing houses in a single month. And it wasn't just a personal victory. This was a massive wake-up call to the entire industry, because Sanderson didn't go through a traditional publisher. He didn't rely on marketing teams, bookstores, and distributors. He went directly to his readers, and that kind of changed everything. Sanderson's Kickstarter wasn't just about one author's success. In a lot of ways, it kind of rewrote the rules of fantasy publishing for the following reasons. So a huge benefit of Sanderson doing his Kickstarter is, one, it has empowered indie authors, because more authors are now realizing that they don't need traditional publishers to succeed. Now with platforms like Kickstarter, Patreon, and Substack, they have really become a viable way to fund books before they even hit shelves. Writers and authors can now literally skip the gatekeepers and go straight to the readers who actually want their books. I know a lot of authors still don't find success with this, but it's now an option. Also, Sanderson proved that fan loyalty can drive massive success. So Sanderson's campaign wasn't about advertising or corporate marketing, it was built on fan trust. So his readers were willing to pre-order books they knew nothing about purely based on their belief in him as an author. So obviously this proved that if you build a strong enough community, you can bypass traditional publishing entirely. And thirdly, the Kickstarter forced publishers to rethink their strategies. Traditional publishing has always been known for being slow, rigid, and risk-averse for years, but Sanderson showed that readers are willing to pay upfront for books they're excited about. So in short, Sanderson, he kind of broke the system here, and now everyone is trying to scramble to catch up. But of course, Sanderson Kickstarter wasn't without any controversy. Some people are now asking, did Sanderson's success make it actually harder for indie authors to get noticed? Because some argue that his record-breaking numbers set an impossible standard for authors to try and fund their own projects. You know, for example, if readers are willing to spend $100+ on Sanderson's campaign, does that leave less room for smaller authors? And some people also argue that this system only works if you're really famous, which I don't really think is the case, but some people will say that. Because Sanderson already had millions of fans, so of course his Kickstarter succeeded, right? But some people find it unrealistic to think that a lesser known author could ever pull off something like this, which I agree with, and therefore this model is only really viable for authors with a bigger platform. But what I'll say here is that I've seen a lot of indie authors that don't have a huge community actually find quite a lot of success on Kickstarter, so I do think that some of these critiques are a bit off the target. But the reality is also that while Sanderson Kickstarter has proved what is possible, I still think it can be a risky strategy for unknown writers. But what is amazing is that this did open doors. Now, more indie authors than ever are turning to Kickstarter and Patreon to fund their books, and that could really change the landscape of fantasy publishing forever. Part 3, a new way to engage readers. So Brandon Sanderson, he isn't just one of the most successful fantasy authors, but he's also a master of audience engagement. While many authors are often quiet, private, or only really interact with fans through publisher-led marketing, Sanderson has built a direct relationship with his readers. So how does he do this? One, he does provide constant updates through his YouTube videos where he shares progress on his books. He does have live streams where he answers fans' questions in real time. He has these detailed newsletters that break down his writing process. He also actively teaches his craft. For example, at BYU, he lectures on writing, which has helped hundreds of thousands of people on YouTube. And what's so fascinating that instead of gatekeeping industry knowledge, he openly shares his techniques, struggles, and lessons learned. And this level of transparency and connection has built an incredible loyal fan base. Readers don't just buy Sanderson's books, they almost feel like they're part of this bigger journey. And that has changed the way fantasy authors interact with their audiences. Brandon Sanderson's approach to connecting directly with reader has had a huge ripple effect on the fantasy genre and landscape and beyond. Because authors are more accessible now than ever. Obviously, there's other factors involved here as well, but it's definitely worth mentioning how Sanderson has revolutionized how readers engage with authors. Because writers are now no longer just a name on a book cover, they are actively building relationships with their readers. And instead of treating fans as customers, many authors are now treating them like a community. You know, a lot of authors often use Patreon or Discord or personal newsletters, and these have become standard tools, for example, for many indie authors. And many self-published and traditional published writers are now using these platforms to try and engage with their readers in ways that publishers never could or would in the past. And we also see that more writers are showcasing their creative process, struggles, and behind-the-scene insights, just like Sanderson is doing on a weekly basis. We don't really see a lot of authors just dropping a book and disappearing. Maybe Stephen King does that, but a lot of authors don't. And so many other authors are now sharing their writing struggles, daily word counts, and creative process, something that Sanderson has been doing for literal years. This creates a stronger bond with readers, it makes them feel like they're part of a journey, and Sanderson has proven that that transparency builds trust, and now more and more authors are following suit. So Sanderson's success didn't just change how authors engage with readers, it also forced traditional publishers to rethink how they market books, because they realize now that authors who connect with their readers, they just sell more books. A few years ago, this was kind of unheard of for traditional published authors to have this active fan communities outside of social media, but now it's becoming more and more common for publishers to encourage authors to build direct channels with their fans, for example on Discord or Patreon or whatnot. Before Sanderson, most marketing was handled by publishers, and authors were just expected to write the books and the publishers handled the rest. But today, authors are expected to build their own brands through newsletters, live streams, and social media engagement. And the authors who interact the most tend to sell the most books as well. Not always the case, but often. Which has also meant that publishers are now actively looking for writers who can build a personal following. Simply put, it feels like authors are no longer just a storyteller. In today's world, it almost feels like authors are also expected to be almost, content creators and community managers and public figures. And again, I don't want to overstate that Sanderson is the only reason why there has been this drastic change, but he's definitely one that has paved the way for this huge change in how authors are engaging with their followers and readers. But I do sometimes think about how authors feel about this change in trend, because obviously not every author wants to be a content creator. I think a lot of them, they just want to write their books in peace. But it almost feels like in today's market, it's becoming really hard to succeed without engaging with the readers. And I'm just just wondering, doesn't this also take away time from writing? What's so unique about Sanderson is that he's not only great at engaging with fans, but he's just an insanely fast writer. But not all authors can juggle both, you know? Some might feel the pressure to spend time building their brand instead of writing their books, which is really unfortunate. But it's worth thinking about that if publishers are going to start seeing direct fan engagement as a requirement, will this also mean that they will prioritize authors who can market themselves over those who just want to write? Because Brandon Sanderson has proven that direct engagement works, but should every author be expected to follow this model? That's the big question moving forward. So let's go to the last part of this video, the rise of massive interconnected universes. Okay, so let's talk about the Cosmere, shall we? As you probably know, Brandon Sanderson isn't just writing fantasy books, he's building this huge interconnected universe on a scale rarely seen in the genre. So what is the Cosmere? The Cosmere is one of the most ambitious projects in modern fantasy because it's a shared universe spanning multiple books, magic systems, and entire planets, all tied together by a deeper hidden lore. For example, Mistborn and the Stormlight Archive take place on different worlds, yet they are part of some grand narratives. And then we have characters like Hoid that exist across multiple series, dropping clues about the larger mysteries of the Cosmere. And Sanderson has planted these hidden connections that fans spent years dissecting, theorizing, and piecing together. So this isn't just a collection of loosely related books. This is a carefully orchestrated long-term plan, more akin to the Marvel Cinematic Universe than a lot of traditional fantasy storytelling. And in many ways, this has also kind of changed the way modern fantasy is written for some people, because the success of the Cosmere model has had a huge influence on how authors approach their world building and storytelling. Because a lot of readers, they love that deep interconnected narratives, and a lot of authors are leaning into this structure. Again, I'm not sure if this is the best example, but Netflix Arcane and the League of Legends universe are also tapping into this appeal of deep expanding lore. Or even a very modern example is Richard Swan's Empire of the Wolf universe, albeit those books are maybe a bit more separate from each other. But I don't think there is any doubt that the creation of the Cosmere is playing a key role in Sanderson's popularity, because Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere isn't just a fantasy universe, it's almost like a puzzle. So unlike traditional fantasy where each book or trilogy kind of stands on its own, Sanderson has embedded hidden details, cryptic connections, and overarching mysteries that stretch across multiple series, planets, and timelines. And this has fundamentally changed the way people engage with his books, because fans, they don't just read Sanderson's books, they study them. You know, every book in the Cosmere contains breadcrumbs that hint at something larger. Or characters like Hoid and the Shards of Adonalasium appear in multiple series, often in subtle ways that require the readers to connect the dots themselves. And this kind of turns reading into a detective game, where fans reread the books again and again, not just for the story, but also to try and decode hidden details that may not pay off for years to come. And then also the fact that Sanderson is so open with his fans through his Q&As, live streams, which has really encouraged readers to dig deeper into the text. Because at the moment, fans don't just discuss what happened in the book, they try to predict what's coming next, how everything ties together, and what clues they may have missed in some of the other books. And we've seen entire communities, YouTube channels, and forums dedicated to dissecting every word of the Cosmere. But lately, there seems to be a lot of fatigue with the MCU formula, so I would love to hear you guys' thoughts when you think about this. Because obviously, with the rise of interconnected fantasy, there is a growing concern in the wider community. I think a lot of people are questioning whether modern fantasy books are becoming too dependent on sequels, especially when it comes to the Cosmere. Because you know, for most fantasy novels, while sometimes being part of a larger world, were usually designed to stand on their own. Just think about the classics, right? The Hobbit, a full adventure in one book. Or Earthsea, individual books that expand on the world but don't demand you read all of them. But today, many Cosmere books feel like they're written with the assumption that the reader will continue the series. More books feel like pieces of a larger puzzle than complete stories, which just means that readers are often left with unanswered questions, loose plot threads, and unresolved character arcs that will only be answered in future books. And some Cosmere series even require readers to follow multiple books across different timelines just to understand every key element if they want to. And I must say that I felt in some cases that Sanderson, he expands his world so much that it just becomes too overwhelming for new readers and old readers alike, because it almost feels like now you just can't pick up a book and enjoy it. You almost need to do a bit of homework first. So yeah, what do you guys think about this? Like, do you think this is a good thing, or are we kind of losing the magic of a self-contained story? Because on one hand, I kind of understand it, you know, interconnected series, they reward long-term fans and they provide that rich layered experience. But on the other hand, there's just something so special about picking a book and feeling satisfied when it ends, and you don't have to wait wait years for the next one. So let me make it clear, there is little doubt that Sanderson has changed the fantasy genre forever, with him popularizing hard magic system, utilizing Kickstarter to sell books, and engaging with readers in new ways, and with the creation of the Cosmere. But if you want to know my thoughts on the dangers of success and why so many people had a negative reaction to Win the Truth, check out this video. Oh, you're still here and you want more? Well, the good news is that I have a Viking book club on my Patreon. If you join my Patreon, then you get access to an exclusive book club where every single month we read one book together and the book can be put forward by you. If you join tier 3 or 4, then you can put a book forward and then I randomly choose a book from the pot that we end up reading together, and throughout the month we discuss the book on the Patreon chats, and then we also have Zoom hangouts, which honestly are some of my favorite times of the month. This month we're reading this book, and next month we're gonna be reading this book. Also, since I launched my Patreon, I basically spent my money back into the channel on video editing. I've had more than 40 videos professionally edited, so if you want to support what I do here and also help me upload more consistently, then I'll leave a link in the description down below.